Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about a recent spike in utility shutoffs, the state's treasure trove of unclaimed stuff, and a proposal to give every Oregonian $750. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are Willamette Week City Hall reporter Sophie Peel and our very own producer, Giulia Fiaoni. It's Friday, June 21st. I'm John Notarianni in for Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Hello, and welcome to the Friday News Roundup. It's the time of the week that we take a look at a few of the bigger stories that have been happening over the last week or so, along with some of the best and brightest journalists in town. Today, we've got Sophie Peel from Willamette Week, as well as our producer, Giulia. Hey, you two. How's it going?
Hi. Good.
Hey, good morning.
So I normally like to start things off with a sort of opening question so people who are listening can get to know you a little bit better. I've been keeping an eye on some of the super bizarre disasters that have been happening in Portland recently. Mm-hmm. Okay, so last week there was that ride at Oaks Amusement Park that got stuck upside down and it stranded 28 people 100 feet in the air. Did you guys see this?
God.
Yes.
Yeah, upside down, right?
Yeah. And then earlier this week, there was that trailer truck that was carrying a bunch of propane tanks. Caught on fire, huge fireball in the sky. I-5 was shut down for much of the day. And luckily nobody was hurt in either of these accidents. But they were kind of like Final Destination style freak disasters.
Yeah.
So my question to you two is what do you think is the next sort of freak disaster that is going to befall Portlanders? The more outrageous, the better.
Can I talk about one that's been happening in my neighborhood?
Oh my God,
that it's
please.
Ongoing? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So I live in Slabtown.
Uh-huh.
And we have a severe rabid raccoon problem.
Oh my God.
So there has been, and no one knows if it's one raccoon or 6 raccoons, but they're super aggressive. They've apparently attacked dogs. There's one home that has a whole informational, basically piece of paper that they laminated about how horrible this raccoon is and how much damage it's done.
What have these raccoons been doing?
I know there was a dog attack. That's the one I know about. And then the rest, I don't know. But I will say, I have seen some huge raccoons. So last week I was walking home. I was a block away from my apartment. And I see these 3 raccoons and they're sort of rummaging around a house. And they just did not give a shit that I was there.
Yeah.
They're kind of freaky. I think they have what's that funny meme where it's they have the confidence of a mediocre white man?
Yeah.
That's a raccoon. Their confidence is just incredible.
Oh my gosh. I'm totally with you on the raccoons. I was sitting out in my backyard and 3 raccoons started inching towards us from different directions. They surrounded us and were slowly closing in on us.
They're strategic too.
I thought we could just scare them away, wave them off, but they were undeterred. And we ended up retreating. We went back inside and got away from the raccoons.
Yeah, raccoons are pretty bold. There's a huge raccoon issue in Toronto where I used to live, and I didn't realize they can scale entire 4-story buildings.
Oh my God.
Really, really intense stuff.
Oh my God. Giulia, follow it up. What do you got?
Mine is a lot less realistic, a lot more imaginative, I would say. Immediately, I pictured a boat-sized whirlpool in the Willamette, just swallowing whole boats and people, just out of nowhere too. Sometime this summer, I'm thinking it might happen.
And the boats just end up in Australia or something.
Yeah, well, I mean that's one theory.
Oh my gosh! What I was imagining is, do you guys remember hearing about the Great Molasses Flood that happened in Boston 100 years ago?
I used to have a children's. That was my favorite children's book when I was little. Was about that flood.
So I'm imagining that happened, but with Ota Tofu. They're like the oldest tofu maker. So the oldest tofu maker in the country is in Portland. And I'm imagining some sort of like catastrophic tofu flood.
Oh gosh, that reminds me of that movie, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
Yeah.
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 I'm here for it.
Let's get into the news of the week. Giulia, what are you looking at today?
Thanks, John. So I'm talking about the rising utility rate cutoffs that are happening across the state. And I'm pulling from some reporting by Mike Roggaway at the Oregonian, Courtney Sherwood, and Monica Samayoa from OPB and Fox 12 staff. So back in April, more than 8,700 Oregon homes lost utility service due to missed bill payments, which is the highest amount in the past 6 years since the state's been collecting data. And there are several factors why, but something that was interesting that really caught my eye is something from Bob Jenks, who's the executive director of the nonprofit Citizens Utility Board. And he was mentioning that it's important to look at the timing of these spikes. And some background on that, because of Oregon state law, utilities can't be shut off if temperatures are forecasted below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And on top of that, you have 60 days to pay a bill after it's mailed to your house. So Jenks was saying if we look back at the utility costs of the severe weather and ice storms that were happening back in January, it makes sense why a lot of the shutoffs were delayed until April. And that's not to mention the mounting rate hikes over the past few years, which Jenks also pointed out. Oregon's biggest utilities have raised rates between 35% and 44% since October of 2021, which is just insane when you factor in the rising costs of living and wages that are just like barely meeting people's bare necessities at this point. And the problem is it's not looking like things are going to get better anytime soon. Right now, the Oregon Public Utility Commission is considering requests to raise rates as high as 27% by Idaho Power and as low as 7.2% by PGE. And a lot of the reporting I read pointed to the reasons why these rates are going up are, firstly, the rising price of natural gas and infrastructure upgrades for renewable technology and to account for extreme weather. But more generally, there's just a continued push for corporate profits. So this is all to say it's kind of a shit show right now. But there are some conversations happening at the Senate level to address things. And in the meantime, there are programs that we'll get into that you can apply for to receive assistance if you need that. But before I get into that, what are you guys thinking about all of this?
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, there's this chart on the Oregonian's website of this spike that happened this year after, many months and years of relatively low shutoffs after the pandemic. And it's especially interesting seeing it spiking right now because we just changed all these laws a couple years ago to make utility shutoffs more humane, right? Like in 2022, they changed the rules on a bunch of these things to like limit the number of times that people can get disconnected, limit the ways that they can go about executing these disconnections. So, there have been law changes in the past couple of years to try and cut back on the number of utility shutoffs. But clearly, the world is changing in such a way where they are still mounting. Yeah.
I think what's interesting is I think Mike Roggaway had mentioned it was that, obviously during the pandemic, there were restrictions on what utility companies could do as far as shutoffs and also as far as like billing. And so I don't remember the exact number, but there were quite a few customers that had like basically it's not back rent, but it's back utility payments. And I think during the pandemic, a lot of us sort of got used to like not paying for things a little bit. There was sort of like a pause on, whether you were late on rent, whether you were late on utility bills. And I think like there's almost this like indignation of like, I have to pay again. It's like, but I liked not paying. Like, I think there's a bit of like a psychological thing going on as well. That's just my theory.
Who pays for water or electricity? Who pays for rent?
I could be very wrong, but I just
God.
feel like it's, we had like 2 years of like, it was kind of optional a little bit. We could kind of squeak out of it. And now it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of like a psychology thing going on here too. But I feel like with these sorts of things, because most of these companies are private companies, if not all of them, there's just this layer of like, we don't really know what games they're playing.
Yeah.
If they're kind of pushing this narrative of so many customers aren't paying and we need to do this or we're not going to reach our bottom line. Like, I feel like there's a bit of a game being played. And and we don't know what it is. I mean, that's how corporations work. But, I feel like they're probably kind of leaning into this narrative a little bit. I don't know that for a fact, but it's just an interesting sort of push-pull between like corporations and them sort of like, crying wolf when I'm not sure if there's a wolf. I'm very curious to see what the legislature does about this because, these companies also have huge lobbying arms. Like they're very politically powerful.
Yeah. It seems like a bit of a dance right now. I can speak a little bit on what's happening at the Senate level. So going back to Jenks from the Utility Board, he's advocating for yearly rate hike caps and, quote, changes to how for-profit private utility rates are approved and other regulatory solutions. While the more conservative perspective, some Republicans are calling for, quote, less pressure to move away from fossil fuels and a focus on expanding energy supply. But just to note, these rate increase approval cases are often lengthy and they have until the end of the year to make a final call on it. So we may not have an answer anytime soon. But I wanted to mention some of the options for assistance programs that are out there right now, and we'll link to all of these in the show notes. But the first is the Oregon Housing and Community Services website. They have a list of county-specific phone numbers you can reach out to if you're in a low-income household and need help weatherizing your home, and also if you're at risk of having your utilities shut off. You can also visit the Oregon Public Utility Commission website, where there's a list of utility provider-specific resources and some others. And then lastly, you can call 211 or visit the Utility Assistance tab on their website for assistance as well. So there are options. I mean, it's frustrating because when people are in these kinds of situations, expecting them to go and have the resources and time to go ask for help is a lot of the times unfair, especially if you're in a home that doesn't have electricity.
Yeah, especially if your utilities just got shut
connection.
off. Yeah.
Exactly. So obviously not ideal, but it's something that if you can get behind it, the links are there.
Yeah, that's important, especially on where we are in the year. I was just looking back on it. Did you guys realize that next week is going to be the anniversary of the heat dome in 2021? Like, it's crazy to think that it got that hot at this time of year since we've had sort of a mild spring so far.
Wow.
But it was the last week of June when we hit that like 117 degree craziness a couple years ago. Well, thank you so much, Giulia. Thanks for looking into that.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, more news of the week.
Have you ever wished you could just go somewhere and decorate cakes? If you're nodding your head right now, well, Cake Hoopla has got you covered. A do-it-yourself cake and cupcake decorating studio in Tigard. They supply you with everything needed, including the baked cakes and cupcakes, and the frosting, the fondant, the sprinkles, tools, and even instructions if you're going for something a bit more highfalutin. You can join workshops, book private parties, or order kits to take home. No matter the skill level, Cake Hoopla has something for everyone. They even offer customizable packages for any kind of party. Kids' birthdays, company events, bridal showers, holiday parties, team building, you get it. Customers can also book a table, the party room, the whole studio, or just choose a pickup option. For more info, head over to Cake Hoopla in Tigard, just off I-5, or go to cakehoopla.com.
At Evernorth Health Services, we believe costs shouldn't get in the way of life-changing care, and we're doing everything in our power to make it possible. Behavioral health solutions that also keep your projections at their best? It's possible. Pharmacy benefits that benefit your bottom line? It's possible. Complex specialty care that cares about your ROI? It's possible. Because we're already doing it. All while saving businesses billions. That's Wonder made possible. Learn more at evernorth.com/wonder.
All right, Sophie, what are you looking into this week?
Yeah, so this week, my colleague Lucas Manfield and I, we did a story on this 20-person team within the state treasury called the Unclaimed Property Division, which I don't think a lot of people know about. I actually didn't know about it until about 3 weeks ago. But it is essentially responsible for all the unclaimed assets from Oregonians, whether they're dead or they just can't be found. So most of that is cash, whether that's uncashed checks, whether that's like stocks and bonds that's been left behind when someone dies. Basically, the state has over $1 billion worth of assets that are just sitting there. And then there's the part that we really focused on, which is actual physical objects, mostly from people who have died and for whom the state or law enforcement can't find heirs or next of kin or, anyone that's supposed to get that object through wills. And so we went to the state treasury, which is this very new building in Salem, and we got to basically look through the vault where they store all these objects.
Can you explain what this vault looked like, Sophie? Because I saw the photos of the stuff you found, but you didn't have any photos of the vault itself in the story, and I was just so curious.
Yeah, I think when I imagined us going to the vaults, I thought we were going to go into the bowels of Hogwarts. And it was going to be very cool and ancient. And it wasn't. It was just kind of a sterile room. So the building wasn't as creepy and cool as I thought it was going to be.
So you weren't in the catacombs?
I'm not going to lie. When we walked into the vault, I was like, really? This is it? But the stuff in the vaults was cool. So a couple things that, we saw, there were two different men who died, I think, in the last 3 or 4 years, who actually died in relative poverty. They were one of them was living in a motel at the time, another was on food stamps. And they had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of ancient relics. So there was one guy that had a 28 million year old fossilized bat, which we saw. There was that same guy had a cuneiform tablet, which was, a tax receipt from ancient times. What that person, whoever that person was, paid in taxes was 16 bushels of barley. That was the tax payment that was etched onto the cuneiform tablet.
Yeah.
There was an original Egyptian mummy mask. The things in there are ridiculously interesting and bizarre. There's also during the Civil War, the Confederacy printed their own money. Mm-hmm. And so there's Confederacy payment, but the Treasury didn't know if it was actually fake or real. So a lot of these things they're having to basically value because if they hold on to them for a certain amount of time and they cannot find someone to claim them, they auction them off. So they're probably going to auction off this fossilized bat, which they're thinking is about $30,000. And other stuff is just really sad. I think one story that I got really tied to was let me back up a little bit. So the state treasury, how they get a lot of these objects is from bank safety deposit boxes that go unclaimed for 3 years. And so they have right now 2,300 of these boxes that are unopened from 2019 onward. So there's a backlog of them. So the state treasury, this division, they took one of these boxes and they opened it up for us basically in front of them and we sorted through it. And it was a box that belonged to a Portland man named Lloyd Barnes. He died just a couple of years ago. And in the box, it just felt like a lot of tragedy. There were 3 pain bottles that were empty, gabapentin, morphine, oxycodone. There's a Fred Meyer receipt from 2018 that was mostly, beef stroganoff and some Advil PM. There was a little shrinky dink ornament. There was a Little League pin. Nothing of value in there. I think the thing that touched me most in that whole box was there was a dependent military ID of Lloyd's kid, Jordan Deemer. I think he was 9 or 10 at the time. Got in touch with him, and he sort of told me that his dad was a lifelong drug addict. He was in the Army. He got a couple back surgeries, and then he just sort of descended into being a drug addict. He died of a fentanyl overdose a couple years ago. And Jordan was, I think, very caught off guard by my call. I don't think he knew this bank safety deposit box existed. And he asked if there was anything else in the box. And I said, well, there's a couple of pictures. There's a picture of a woman and she looks to be in her 20s. It looks like it was taken in the 80s or 90s. And I sent him a picture of the picture and he was like, oh my God, that's my mom. I've never seen that picture before. And he's not really in touch with his mom anymore. So it was just very human, but also very tragic things.
Yeah. There's this part where you talk about the estate's field team and this story where they basically were they went out to a farm and the person who lived there had died, but the cows had gotten out. And they're having to go out and corral cows as part of their job of working for the state treasury. That is one of my favorite details of this story.
No, that was
these,
I think the craziest.
State bureaucrats herding cows in a field in rural
was
Oregon.
My favorite story because in the estates team, they're a bunch of former Marines. They're not cow herders. And I remember asking them, they were like, yeah, we kind of herded the cows. And I was like, wait, how did you herd the cows? And they were like, just with a stick, like you see in the movies. I'm like, what? What? There were like 78 cows, and they ended up like bringing feed to feed the cows because they were kind of starving. And then they, over the next couple of weeks, they had to figure out how to auction off all these cows. I mean, just like the breadth of what they have to do with individual homes and properties is just like wild to me.
Oh my gosh. Julia, what jumped out at you in all of this? I feel like me and Sophie have just been frothing about this story for 10 minutes.
I love the back and forth, and I am just like picturing this reality that some of these people who've passed on, their homes and their items are almost given a new life through the excitement of these treasury workers, which is kind of cool, because growing up, I feel like I was always like threatened by the idea of, if you don't tell people where you want your stuff to go, the government's going to take your stuff and it's gone forever. No. So I'm wondering, Sophie, you mentioned something about a common school fund. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it seems like that's the alternative once these items are kind of put to rest.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because all the unclaimed cash they get, all the unclaimed property they get, all of that pretty much sits in the common school fund. And what they do is the state treasury, it just builds interest. So every year, the interest the common school fund makes, like the common school fund itself doesn't fund schools, the interest made off of every year off of that common school fund does. But it's a ton of money because it's like a $2.3 billion fund. So every year it's like a $70 million gift just from interest accrued over that year goes to school. So it's a ginormous amount of money. And so, when the state treasury takes over one of these estates and they sell the property, they're holding that money for an heir, but it's being held in the common school fund. So it's like a win-win situation. The state isn't taking that money, but they are getting interest off of it and then pouring it into schools.
Yeah.
I mean, a big part of this is the state trying to reconnect people with their relatives' valuable items, right? But there were some mentions of like that it can be tricky to do that. You had one story about a Purple Heart that had been turned over to the Treasury from Bank of America. And one of the heirs was saying that they were trying to get it, but like they couldn't. They were having a hard time jumping through the hoops that were necessary. Like, what is the process of getting some of this stuff back from the state if you believe you have the rights to it?
Yeah, it's not always easy. So, with cash, it's like if you can go onto the state treasury's website, you can click in unclaimed property, and you can basically look for your name to see if you have unclaimed cash. Because 1 in 7 Oregonians, if not more, have, it's not usually a lot of money. It's usually between like $25 and $50 from somewhere. But with those objects that either have more sentimental value or just actually like at higher like actual monetary value, it can be hard for heirs to claim that property. They do have to go through a lot of hoops to like prove who they are and why they like have a stake in this. We did hear that complaint quite a lot, that people have a hard time accessing these objects, and then at some point some of them just give up. The other thing too is objects that were found in bank safety deposit boxes. If an heir wants to claim that, they have to pay the fee for that bank safety deposit box to the bank. And so sometimes people are like, I don't want to pay $600. Like, not worth it. Especially for a box full of junk. And sometimes it is full of junk. Sometimes it's not.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's a fascinating story.
It's never ending. Like I could talk for probably 4 hours just about the things that like we looked at and saw. But it's awesome.
Yeah. Super cool. Yeah. Well, thank you, Sophie.
Yeah.
The story that I wanted to look at this week is about universal basic income that might be coming to the Oregon ballot in the fall. Leaning on reporting from Carlos Fuentes at the Oregonian, as well as Hazel Sheffield at The Guardian on this. There's this new proposal that is probably going to go on the fall ballot that could give everybody in the state about $750 a year. This is an idea that's been around for a little bit. I feel like Andrew Yang in the presidential race got a lot of buzz talking about, like, we need a universal basic income for people. Well, this could happen in Oregon. It could become the first state in the country to do this by increasing corporate taxes. There's been some supporters that have been collecting signatures. They have enough to get it on the ballot. And if it's approved, it could go into effect in January of 2025. It's interesting. There's some people that are really excited about it. There's some people who think this is a horrible idea. What do you guys think?
Well, I want to hear more about who's bothered by this. Like, what's the risk of making this a thing come 2025?
So the thing that it's proposing is a 3% tax on corporate sales over $25 million. Then those proceeds would be like equally distributed among Oregonians. You do the math, $750 times like what? We have like 4.4 million Oregonians. This would be like $3.3 billion in money. So right off the top, people are like, wait, $3.3 billion in new state revenue. Aren't there better ways to spend this than just giving everybody a little bit of cash? Businesses obviously hate it. Like corporations do not like paying more taxes, and a sort of flat 3% fee on big corporations, of course, they are going to go up in arms about it. And there's sort of like worries that like, a lot of this is going to go to like rich people who like don't need $750.
Yeah.
And like the sort of bigger philosophical question about universal basic income is just like what it does for people's incentive to work, right? Like, why should someone else be paying taxes into someone else who doesn't deserve it? I mean, I don't know how much I agree with that. And especially if it's only $750 a year, it's not like somebody's going to be able to live on this. But yeah, just right off the top, those are some of the main criticisms that something like this faces.
Yeah, I feel like something that you pointed out, John, the frustration that may come with people who are very wealthy receiving this payment as well. I think the benefits of somebody who may just need one more month's worth of rent a year outweigh that frustration, where I would be like, you know what, if this is the only way to make this pass, then that makes sense. That's okay. Like, we'll give everyone $750 if it means the person in most need also gets it, right? That's my perspective on it.
Yeah. What do you think, Sophie?
I think I just wish measures like this were a little bit more discerning. I don't need $750. Would I like it? Of course I would. What would I spend it on? I don't know, like, organic turkey rather than like not organic turkey. Like I don't need it. And I think we just need to like target things to make them more meaningful. Giulia, like you said, $750 for some people is like a lifesaver. It keeps them from eviction or whatever it is. And then for other people, it's just like fun spending money. And I just think that's where measures like this just feel kind of sloppy to me. And I know that takes away, like that's the whole point of universal basic income is that everyone has it. But that's kind of my issue with it is like a lot of us don't need it. And we shouldn't be spending our money on that, especially when it's going to like increase anathema between business and constituents. Like it just feels like there is unnecessary like heartburn that happens with this sort of thing when it's just like, spraying the money everywhere when a lot of people just like don't need it. I think that's my frustration. It's like, I think the intent is good, but it's like, if you want to be effective, like why not like get the most out of this program that you can and actually target the people who need it?
Yeah. And to me, it feels like just another sort of manifestation of our crazy ballot initiative program that we have here in Oregon. Like, let's talk about some of the greatest hits, like notably Measure 110, when a bunch of people looked at it and were like, yeah, that's a great idea, and voted for it. And then several years later, obviously, a lot of the problems with that issue have sort of come to the forefront. And I sort of feel the same way about this measure. It's like, sure, anything that we can do to sort of like decrease the crunch that the people who are in the most poverty that are having the hardest time in Oregon is a good thing to do. But is this really a good way to do it? If you're voting and you get a ballot and it says, do you want $750? Like, I think a lot more people are going to just sort of say, yes, I would like $750 than people who are going to sort of think through the bigger policy ramifications of it.
Yeah, I think governance by ballot initiative is really, like, I understand it's a cornerstone of democracy to let people decide, what.
I see the tightrope you're walking, Sophie. Keep going.
I think there's something to be said for, like, I don't know what policy is best. Why am I writing a policy? I don't know shit about policy making.
Yeah.
Like, you're right, John. Like, we've seen Measure 110 and I think other ballot initiatives too that we've passed because they sound really nice. And, the proponents of it have done a very good job of like marketing it. But we don't really have the foresight or the skills to know what could go horribly wrong. And things have gone horribly wrong in some cases. And I just think we're so like ballot initiative happy. I think it's put Oregon in a worse position than we were 10 years ago because we think any good idea should be on the ballot without real like forethought into what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think about like the Portland Clean Energy Fund a lot. in this discussion, which it's a local program, but it was passed by a sales tax on large retailers. And like, talk about a program where we didn't quite know what we were getting, right? Now we're like, oh shit, it's bringing in $1.3 billion over 5 years. And we're struggling to find, ways to spend that money, which on one hand, great problem to have. Like, God bless anything that like, creates more money in the government coffers. And like, we have to find ways to deploy it reasonably. But like, this feels like it could be a similar thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like with this one, I'm willing to see where it goes. Just like Measure 110, how it was passed and now pulled back on. I would be curious enough to have this be passed and pulled back on rather than just completely tossed aside, because it is a step in a direction to try something new. And I think that aside from it being messy sometimes, that's what's exciting about this ballot initiative world that we live in, is that you do get to try new things and see if there are alternatives that could be really beneficial to some people that we just aren't trying right now,
Yeah. Sophie, would you be willing to give your universal basic income to Giulia? 'Cause it sounds like she needs it.
Look, if it passes, I'm keeping my money. Just to be clear.
She's getting that organic turkey.
Yes, that's right.
No. I mean, Sophie, there is a provision that like excess funds would be distributed among senior services, healthcare, elderly childhood, and K-12 education. So you could be the noble soul who says, no. I will forego my $750.
I will consider the pros and cons. You think I'm a bigger person than I am.
I'm going to call you once this comes through.
All right. Well, look, if this passes now, I'm going to have to give it to old people because now it's public.
Now it's public.
So no organic turkey for me.
Sophie, Giulia, thank you so much. Sophie, thank you for your selflessness, for your generosity. Giulia, enjoy that new iPad or whatever you buy with your $750.
Can't wait.
Well, that's all for us this week here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. I'm executive producer John Notarianni. Our producers this week were Giulia Fiaoni and Natalie Rivera. Our Hey Portland newsletter editor is Rachel Monahan, and our host is Claudia Meza. Original music by Jenny Conley and Stephen Drisos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back on Monday morning with a lot more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.